by Bill Wyman and Lorraine Ali, two of my favorite critical peers. Bill, you were the first person in Chicago to write about R. Kelly. You wrote about him in The Reader not long after he'd gotten signed by Wayne Williams of Jive Records. Heard him singing at a backyard party. And Lorraine, you've covered Kelly throughout his career for Newsweek, for the LA Times, as long as you've been a critic. Where do both of you stand today on this artist?
Want me to start? Well,
sure.
It's really interesting because his musical evolution has been really amazing. And I mean, I literally remember him doing his first, one of his first videos, Bump and Grind, at the Vic. You don't remember, Jimmy? It was right behind my
yeah. Right, literally, you were doors away.
Yeah, literally, right? And, you know, what would you see? I mean, it's a really good song, and he's obviously a very good physical, you know, has a great physical presence and things like that. And who would have thought then that he would be someone who becomes so restlessly creative and unusual, quirky and bizarre, and able to come up with some of these massive worldwide hits that he did. And at the same time, I mean, it's just like, to me, the thing that rankles, the single thing that rankles is that, you know, famous people don't get treated differently from other people. And it just seems he is a criminal and he should be in jail. So my approach to R. Kelly is very reductive, A, in that sense, and then B, this infuriating thing when people write about him and they act like they shouldn't mention that he's a criminal. And that, you know, there seems to be this almost willful desire on the part of a lot of people who've covered him over the years to just not talk about it, like, oh, let's not talk about all that, let's talk about the fun stuff. And so that's what I object to. I don't have a problem with anyone saying he's a brilliant guy, which he obviously is, but I do have a problem with them not talking about the real terrible human toll that this guy has taken out on society over the past 20 years.
No, the guy is clearly brilliant, and the guy has done some really amazing work, and things that, you know, I would have never expected from the beginning as well. Even though I came to the party a little later than you because, you know, I wasn't locally there, I was here in LA. But what's interesting is that idea of, you know, when people are discussing him, especially when other, you know, critics are writing about him, of not just even forgetting this, but just not even mentioning it. You know, anytime like Chris Brown comes up, the first line is, you know, the guy who beat Rihanna, the guy who, you know, and somehow R. Kelly's gotten this pass, and not only has he gotten this pass, he's actually become more famous for it, and then jumped off that, springboarded off that, and become this, you know, guy who is super duper famous, but we've left that springboard part in the dust. You know, that's what I find amazing.
So last weekend in Los Angeles, outside of Los Angeles at Coachella, you had an army of reporters covering it for you as music editor of the LA Times. He gets on stage with Phoenix. He sings Ignition Remix. He's playing to, what, 100,000 predominantly white and rather moneyed kids who could afford those Coachella tickets. Yeah. What does that mean?
Well, I think it's really interesting because, you know, the big thing was Daft Punk's going to show up. You know, Daft Punk's going to be here, and then it was R. Kelly. And you think there would have been a big sort of collective, but instead it's like, ooh, R. Kelly, you know, and it's kind of like this, I think it's this kind of fun inside joke in a way, like, wow, nudge, nudge, like it's that guy, you know, but in another way it's like, wow, we need to celebrate this guy and like forget this because we're just focusing on his brilliance and the fact that he can genre jump, that he can, you know, jump into Coachella and, you know, we'll accept him here, and that makes us kind of look more open-minded. But again, there's just something fundamentally wrong with that kind of hipster idea that, you know, we're going to give this guy a pass. Not only are we going to give him a pass, there's going to be some kind of fun inside joke about it. And I find that incredibly offensive also as a woman, because what we're talking about with R. Kelly is largely stuff that was perpetrated against women, and somehow that seems to be less offensive to the hipster crowd and to others than I would assume other things. I don't know. I don't understand why this isn't taken a little more seriously in terms of what he's done in his past.
Wow. And, you know, that's such a good point, and I'll take it one farther. And of course why they're doing it, because it's a financial thing. You know, these festivals are so bankrupt on so many levels. They're miserable to go to. So A, they're miserable experiences. B, it's all financial. C, the lineups are just incredibly retro. So on top of all this, what they have to do is come up with these these basically PR gambits to just get a little bit of buzz.
But Bill, obviously, Kelly's in the midst of some sort of campaign this summer. Starts it at Coachella with Phoenix, continues it at Bonnaroo as a headliner, and then he's going to headline and close out Pitchfork in Union Park in Chicago.
Well, it's just exactly what you said. It has nothing to do with him, though. Frankly, it has to do with Pitchfork. Again, I mean, it's outrageous for Pitchfork to have someone like that who's a guy who's created such crimes in Chicago against young Chicago people. I mean, what if he'd been raping, underage guys with hipster guys with whiskey beards? Would they be upset about that? It's an unappetizing image, but let me tell you, it's not more unappetizing than the actual images that were caught on video and left on Jim's front doorstep of the things he was doing to that young girl. And then we get to this thing. This is the media thing, I think, that Lorraine was talking about. Like, why does he get a pass and Chris Brown doesn't? And this is like my theory, what I call the ick factor. That some people are so gross, and they do things so gross that you just can't repeat it. I mean, I'm reluctant even now to say what was on that video, right? You don't want to bum everyone out. It's just like the same thing with Roman Polanski.
Well, Bill, I know where you're going. You wrote a wonderful piece for The New Yorker about 6 months ago about Michael Jackson. And Jackson, with those two instances of sexual relationships with underage boys, the one that he settled and the one that was taken into court, I would often get, when you dared to mention those incidents in relation to reviewing Jackson's music, and the last two albums had a lot of instances that were sort of about those incidents, when he was singling out the California prosecutor by name.
Yeah.
Tom Sneddon is a bad man, and when he's singing All the Lost Children about being lost in the woods and these children, it's like, all right, as critics, we have to separate the art and the artist, right? We all know despicable people sometimes make great art. But what about when those despicable people are making art about their despicable acts? I mean, that's when, to me, we almost have an obligation to address it.
Well,
right?
I think it depends on what they're saying about their despicable acts. I mean, are they, looking at it from a are they defending those acts? Are they looking at it from the angle of feeling remorse about those acts? It depends on how, they're looking at them, because I think I actually appreciate it more if an artist comes out and is, the idea of pretending that it didn't happen bothers me more than an artist actually bringing it up in their music. Now, what they're doing with it in music is another thing. Is it, I was wrongly accused or whatever it is. But I think if you're, exploiting it and, pushing that forward to keep your name in the mix, to keep you as this kind of, figure that, still has a kind of mystique to them, I think that's a problem.
Well, what do you think it is with Kelly, Lorraine? Because there's always been a 50-50 mix of the spiritual songs where he's consistently apologizing to his heavenly Father for sins unnamed, and I want to have sex with you in the kitchen. I want to have sex with you in the jungle. I want to have sex with you in my Jeep. I want to have all sorts of imaginable sex with you, and I'll even trap you in the closet with a midget.
Well, I think he's, in that way, I think he's appealing to what many people have inside them. There is the good and there is the bad, and people are constantly struggling with their good and their bad every day, and I think he's tapping into that, and that's legitimate. I mean, that is often what makes good music and what makes good art and what can connect with people. When you think of the actual act and the things that this guy did, it becomes another animal, but the fact that people are connecting to it doesn't surprise me. I mean, I think it's, it holds those elements that are needed to, make good art. Now, the fact that he's marketing it and the fact that, you're saying, here's this new R. Kelly moment where he's rolling out these things, there's Pitchfork, there's, Coachella, that's what artists do now. They're trying to multi-platform. So he's just doing what an artist does now, attacking on several different fronts, but he just happens to have this despicable past.
Do you think that any of the young women who are there and partying and having fun are aware of the young women in Kelly's wake who've been seriously hurt? Should they be aware?
Let me address this because I know, and it goes back to my other problem. Like, I wouldn't have any problem with Coachella or Pitchfork or anything as long as it said, hey, he was accused of this. There's a videotape, and there's about approximately a dozen credible cases where it's pretty obvious that he was that he either had pictures or had filmed or had sex with underage girls. If they just explain that, and if the coverage explains that, but to me, people don't explain it enough, and I don't think a lot of people know. And another question I have is his appeal does he have a white pop appeal anymore, or is it sort of the black R&B audience and hipsters?
That's it. Yeah, it's Space Jam, and I Believe I Can Fly was the pop exception.
Right.
And he hasn't been a presence on the pop charts forever.
He's kind of known on that level, but he's not really. And things might change if he's white, which is another thing that bothers me because, as I've said often during all this case, that say if he's going to St. Louis and he's playing a show and the local pop critic, which I have a gazillion examples of, doing the pre-seed on the show and not talking about the charges. I mean, what do people think goes on backstage at an R. Kelly show?
Oh.
I mean, why in the world would you let your kids be in the same zip code as R. Kelly? Much less, in this thing where, they're idolizing him and a lot of people are at his, conceivably at his mercy. So that to me is the answer. I don't think people do. That's my whole thing. I mean, he has a total right to tour. Coachella has a right to book him. But we have a right to kind of say it's like a really disgusting thing. And just to make it clear, I mean, I don't care, even if you say, I think he's innocent, I don't even have an issue with that. What just bothers me is that no one says that, look, there's like 14 young girls who basically said that they were, at the very least, had sex with, and then, this incredible litany of disgusting sexual acts from there to, the closet with him. Then you can go on to that, but they don't say that. They want to cover it up for some reason. I'm not sure why. So I think it's the ick factor. Again, with Roman Polanski, people always act like he was this randy European and that he ran afoul of American mores, when that's actually not what happened at all. And people don't like to say what actually the girl said he did to her.
Lorraine, do you think that the ick factor is appealing to the young men and the young women? And if so, is it different for men and women? I mean, is that part of the appeal, is that they're kind of disgusted by yet titillated by this guy?
Well, number one, I mean, I think it's right that probably a lot of them don't even know. I mean, because as we're talking about it, many times when R. Kelly is in the press, it's not brought up anymore. So, many of them probably don't know. But the ones that do, I think there is that titillation factor because look at Charlie Sheen. I mean, that's a really good example. A guy who was sort of celebrated for his really appalling behavior towards women. Unfortunately, I think that's part of society right now. I mean, I think that's part of, celebrity right now. And I think there's also that thing of, it's not somebody redeeming themselves after their bad behavior, but it's almost like accepting their bad behavior and embracing them because of it. And, I think he came before the Charlie Sheen wave, but he kind of was like the first part of that wave because you thought when all this stuff first broke, you're like, this guy's over, this guy's done. And I feel like he was one of the first celebrities where he actually did better after having such an appalling, after having all this appalling news come out about him, he actually did better. And following that, I feel like we've had a string of celebrities that's happened to since. And I don't know if it set a precedent or he was just sort of on the crest of, this new acceptance of what we're willing to not only accept but embrace because, well, hey, nobody's perfect.
But Kelly, was embraced with this Trapped in the Closet project by IFC,
right,
which is hipster TV, right? He's embraced by Pitchfork, which is hipster music. He's talking about taking Trapped in the Closet to Broadway. So the album's, it's true.
Wow.
It's absolutely true. And he has a book published by Tavis Smiley Books in hardcover. All right.
Well, that is a great, as Samuel Johnson once said in a different context, what a coalition. So, another thing to remember about him is that he is a very strange guy. This is a guy who's illiterate, right?
Yeah.
I remember talking to someone in Chicago who played in his band once, said, look, he doesn't have a checkbook. So this is a guy who came out of a very weird kind of space. And I think, you get that kind of celebrity And there is something alchemical about him too, because really seriously, someone like that should have collapsed under his own weight, just under mismanagement, stuff like that. But somehow or other, his celebrity, he managed to protect himself. I don't know anything really about his manager or anything if it's him, but you got to give a guy like that credit against all those. And there's also, Jim, was it in your article or somewhere else that there was some of his early friends said he was molested, maybe tried to commit suicide as a kid?
In Solar Coaster, he writes about being sexually approached by a man, and it's not consummated, but yeah, sources had told me he was molested by a man. He writes about losing his virginity at age 8 to a woman who was 10 years older than him, and it sounds like abuse. She continued it for years. He was not allowed to tell anyone. And he writes about getting shot and having when he was riding his bike, and his mother told one of his closest associates on her deathbed that that wasn't a shooting. He used that story to cover up a suicide attempt. So it was a tragic upbringing for sure, but it was also one that had a lot of incredible benefits. I mean, he went to Kenwood Academy in Hyde Park, and he had people there who believed in him. Lena McClin, the music teacher, he had a lot of benefits that other kids on the south side of Chicago don't have.
But then again, he apparently graduated without learning how to read.
He graduated. He did not graduate. He could not read and write. All of which is a fascinating story. I think that gets back to what Lorraine was saying earlier. When we look at Marvin Gaye, killed, shot by his alcoholic, drug-addicted father, I mean, a horrible life, and great art came out of it. And from that pain in his life came catharsis. But Marvin Gaye didn't cause pain to a dozen other women.
Right. Right.
Well, yeah. I mean, that we know of. I mean, this is the other thing. We know because there are tapes of it. There's people that came out and said this, but we don't know what Marvin Gaye did or anybody else is doing. I mean, so I feel weird about saying.
No, and I'm sure another argument on Kelly's behalf is that he's probably not doing anything but a lot of, you go back and read the books about the guys in the 60s and the 70s.
Yes.
It's pretty routine for there to be young girls in the mix. On the other hand, he seems to be, I don't want to go out and say something really politically incorrect, but if the age of consent in a particular state is 18 and the woman is 17 and she goes to a Rolling Stone show or whatever, and then the type of girls that he seemed to be interested in seemed to be pretty young, right? These weren't like precocious 17-and-a-half-year-olds, right?
Well, no. I mean, the comment that the quotes that ran often in my stories and in the stories Abdon Palish did were, he needs help. The one that crystallized it to me was, after an R. Kelly performance, there can be 24 beautiful, naked, half-naked, legal-age women, and there's one little girl in the corner who's staring at her shoes, and she's acne-ridden and she's shy, and that's where he goes night after night after night. So the lead we always used was that he was abusing his position of wealth and fame to pursue underage girls. It was predatory.
I think part of the reason, that he appeals to hipsters, we're talking about now, he is in the R&B world and he's in the hipster world, but that pop world in between, he's not there anymore. And I think one of the reasons he's in the hipster world is because, obviously, of, this past. I mean, I think it makes him, like I said earlier, sort of this kitschy inside joke. And, if I find that kind of reprehensible. I find that it's one thing, if you were to walk up to any of the people, let's say, on the field at Coachella or Pitchfork and say, okay, I want you to name me 3 R. Kelly songs, and just see if they could actually do it. I mean, are they really there for the music, or are they there for the spectacle that is R. Kelly?
That's such a great
And if it's the spectacle that is R. Kelly, that's repulsive. Because he is a spectacle for this very disgusting reason. If it's the music, it's sort of another thing. And as a music writer, do I have a moral obligation to bring this up when I write about him? No, I don't think it's a moral obligation. But as a good journalist and as a reporter and as somebody that needs to tell the whole story, and that's what your job is, I think it's a given that needs to be in whatever you're writing about him, because it is part of the story. It is part of what's made him who he is today. It's part of his public persona, and it's in his music. So I think it has to be brought up. think it gets to too, yeah, celebrities have it really easy, and I think women have it really hard. I mean, this is just the reality of this. I mean, and it's almost just as given at this point. Like, if you're a woman in a situation hanging out with a band, or if you're around a music person, well, then you're kind of asking for it, because you know what the ending thing's going to be. You know, and I think the bigger problem here is, like, this kind of stuff is happening all the time, and at this point, it's almost accepted. It's just like, well, that's what's going to happen. You know, and I think, in a way, with R. Kelly, looking at this whole thing in hindsight, I think, you know, there was outrage, yeah, at the time, but there was kind of this underlying thing of, like, yeah, but if you're hanging out with a music person, yeah, you're hanging out with a musician or a rapper or a singer, this is kind of what's going to happen, and, like, that needs to stop. You know, that my whole entire time that I have been conscious of music and writing about it, that has been a given, and that is really disturbing, and clearly it's not getting better.
Well, let's go back to Pitchfork and the motivation. What do we think about them taking money from this guy's performance?
Yeah, it's, I mean, they should, I mean, they have a perfect, it's legal to do it and they have a right to, but they should be publicly castigated.
I agree. Yeah, I agree.
A third of the audience at Pitchfork in Union Park are going to be women, and what's the appeal to them? I mean, yeah, I want to see Bjork and I want to see Savages, and Savages is 180%, you know, degrees removed from R. Kelly. It's the diametric opposite. How can these things be sold to me on the same bill? Doesn't it mean anything anymore?
Well, I think, you know, part of it, sure, like, I like some of his music. I would want to hear some of his music. But there's that other thing of, and, you know, what we were just talking about is that if you're going to be the one that brings up, like, hey, you know, I'm like, this is wrong, you know, and it's sort of like, oh, you're just harping on this thing that's, like, really old. Get off your soapbox, you know, just, like, get with it. You're too uptight. You know, that happened a long time ago, as though it's an isolated incident and it's never happened since then, you know. So I don't know. I mean, it's almost like you are, I don't know what the word is, maybe not sidelined, but pressured into thinking, like, in this way that is, well, you know, this is just the way it is, and it happened, and, like, get over it, you know. And again, that gets back to the point of, you know, just know where your place is in this music world. Just know where it is, and once you know where it is and you accept that, then you should be cool with this, you know. And I think that's the underlying thing that, you know, is wrong. I mean, the women go in there, I can't speak to what they're there for, but I highly doubt that they, like I said, you know, name me 3 R. Kelly songs. They're not going to be able to do it.
And again, they don't, you know, if there was this position where they say, and next up on stage, you know, if they don't know who it is, they go, here's a guy who, you know, again, I hate to even say this thing, what he was filmed doing to that poor girl, has done this, and he's done this, and he, you know, there's another 13-year-old who said this and this, and you recite his actual greatest hits. You know, if you introduced him that way, I don't think people would enjoy the show. I mean,
well, thank you guys. Thank you so much, Bill. Thanks, Lorraine. I really appreciate it.